So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's virtual career exploration session. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our youth programming, our youth programs in Dauphin, Perry, Juniata, and York counties are here to provide youth like yourselves with workforce development tools, training, and support to help you succeed as you enter the workforce. Our virtual career exploration series was created to help you as you explore all the different options available to you and help you choose the best path. We will be taking questions during this presentation. To submit a question, please use the chat feature. Your questions will be kept anonymous. Only staff will be able to see who sent them. And if we don't get to your question during the presentation, rest assured we will have time at the end of this to get out any questions we've received. So for today's session, we have Mindy Marker from Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources here to speak with us. Mindy, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, so thank you all for tuning in. So before I start with this, I will say that, like she said, anytime during the point in the presentation, feel free to ask any questions that you might have. I'll try my best to keep up with it. Sometimes when I get on a roll and get talking, I might miss one. So I think, Lindsay, you can cut in at any point if I'm missing a question or if I don't see it. You can cut in and ask that for me. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to begin with this talk just briefly introducing myself and my background. So my background is actually in wildlife biology. I attended Penn State University with a major in wildlife and fishery science. So initially my goal was to become a wildlife biologist. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of jobs for that. So after college, I actually ended up in animal care. I worked a couple different places. During college, I worked for a wildlife rehabilitation center. So the photo of me holding Violet the skunk there was at Center Wildlife Care. And then after I was done with college, I moved back home and I worked at Lake Tobias Wildlife Park. So I was a zookeeper for a little while there as well. And during my time then, I realized I really enjoyed working with animals. However, a lot of jobs in animal care don't pay very well. So I found myself needing a job that paid just a little bit more money. I started looking through the civil service site and I found an ad for a park ranger. And it sounded kind of intriguing, although they told us that we'd be going to police academy at some point, and I didn't think it was for me. But I decided to try the DCNR Ranger trainee program anyway. And I found out that I really loved it. I loved working outdoors. I loved the park that I was working in. So the fall after my summer of being a trainee, I actually went to Temple University Law Enforcement Academy. So I spent 9 months basically learning all different kinds of policing techniques and how to be a ranger. And so I graduated in 2017. And then I spent that full year as a law enforcement ranger. Some things happened within the park. There was an opening for an environmental educator position, and I actually thought that that was kind of more of what I was interested in anyway. And I jumped at the position, and I was able to get it. And so I am now the environmental educator here at Little Buffalo State Park. So I went through a major career change, but it was for the best. But I'm here to talk to you about all of the different careers within DCNR. But I can talk a little bit more about the ranger and the outdoor positions here, maintenance and things like that too. So who is the DCNR? It's the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. It was originally an organization that was called the DER, so the Department of Environmental Resources. And in 1995, they chose to split that into the Pennsylvania DCNR and the Pennsylvania DEP. So the DEP deals a little bit more with environmental regulations and things like that. So maybe private citizens getting permits for builds and things like that. The DCNR, for the most part, deals with our state parks and state forests. So within the DCNR, we manage about 300,000 acres just in the PA state parks, and we have 121 parks in the state. We manage the parklands for hunting, fishing, hiking, and a variety of other recreational activities. And many of our parks have education staff as well that provide public outreach and programs to help people learn how to recreate responsibly. State forests are another division of DCNR, and they actually have about 2.2 million acres of forests throughout 48 of our 67 counties. So the state forests are managed a little bit differently. They're managed mainly to promote native habitat, conservation of resources, and they also deal with wildfires as well, both on private and state-owned lands. So their education division is a little bit more focused on educating about wildfire prevention as well as suppression. We also have a couple other bureaus that not too many people are familiar with. We have the TopoGeo, which is the Bureau of Geological Survey. So they work to map and explore the surfaces of the entire state, and they collect data on water, energy, mineral, and land resources. There's also a Bureau of Recreation as well, and they partner with local communities to establish green spaces, and they create connections between the natural resource conservation and community revitalization. There's also a Bureau of Facility Design, which is made up of engineers, geologists, architects, landscapers, drafters, surveyors, and a variety of IT and administrative staff as well. So they're in charge of designing and remodeling new facilities in the parks, as well as building and updated bridges, dams, roadways, and things like that. Now, Pennsylvania has the third largest system of state parks in the U.S., and our forest products contribute over $4.5 billion a year to our economy. And for every $1 invested in our state parks, they generate about $12 in additional revenue for us. So DCNR is a very important organization, and there's really a wide variety of job opportunities in here today. So I just want to cover a little bit about why we have a DCNR and the importance of preserving these resources before I go into detail about the jobs. So throughout the early 1800s, forests originally covered some 90% of Pennsylvania, so it was called Penn's Woods for a reason. However, as settlers moved in, they started to clear the land. They saw it as a seemingly endless resource, so they thought there was no way they could ever diminish the forests of Pennsylvania. So they cleared the land left and right for farming practices. They cleared it to create ships, to create railways, homes, and just about everything in between. By the end of actually these are logs being floated down the Susquehanna. You can just see millions and millions of logs. And this is actually a structure called a log boom. It's about 6 miles of walls that enclose these logs, and they basically floated them in the river until they were ready for sawmills. Why they didn't just leave them in the forest, I'm not really sure, but it's kind of fascinating to think of the entire Susquehanna just covered in these logs. So Williamsport was actually the log capital of the world at this time, so most of the lumber was actually moving through Williamsport, and much of the northern part of the state was cleared. So by the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s, Penn's Woods had become Penn's Desert. These photos were taken in northern PA in the early 1900s, and they demonstrate the decimation of forests in our state. Logging practices had created what he called Penn's Desert, and to reverse this damage, University of PA botanist Joseph Rothrock launched a campaign that led to the creation of a state forestry commission that would eventually lead to the DCNR that we know today. So the first couple parks that were created in Pennsylvania, or at least in the United States, were actually just parks that were areas for people to get away from the industrialization that was going on, to get out of the cities and breathe clean air. Valley Forge was actually the first state park that was created in Pennsylvania, and it was eventually turned over to the National Park Service. In 1901, Mr. Joseph Rothrock, which I just mentioned, created the Commission of Forestry because he saw a need to protect the trees in the state. The photos are American chestnut trees, a tree that was decimated by a blight in the early 1900s. But many of these giant trees were timbered down prior to the blight even reaching the United States. So many of these giant trees were killed and used for barns, mills, houses and things like that. In fact, if you visit Schoaf's Mill here at Little Buffalo State Park, much of our timber in that mill is made from the American chestnut. So much of our forests look like this with these large trees, but in the early 1900s they start to really disappear. So we started to set certain parks aside to try and reserve these trees and keep them for future generations. So in 1902, Mont Alto Resort was basically a place with a pool and a hotel. It was kind of like an early picnic area. That was actually purchased by the state, and it was turned into one of the first state parks. In 1903, they added two more areas very similar, including Caledonia and Promised Land, and the Mont Alto School of Forestry, which formed. And that's actually where I began my career with Penn State, was at Penn State Mont Alto School of Forestry. So in the early 1900s, people started to camp a little bit. The invention of the automobile allowed people to travel further away from home, and so people needed a place to stay. So they actually just started parking their vehicles along the side of the road and pitching up these little makeshift tents. So a gentleman by the name of Gifford Pinchot saw the need to start creating some areas for people to camp out or to stay overnight. So he created this workforce of individuals that would build these campsites and build these facilities for people to stay in. And his name will pop up here again in a little bit. But this became a very, very popular way to employ some of Pennsylvania's citizens, as well as creating these little parks for people to travel more. I mentioned in 1928, Cook State Forest was purchased, and this is the first time that we actually purchased an outstanding natural resource just for the sole purpose of preserving it. And if anybody's familiar with Cook Forest, it's one of the last old growth forests that we have left in Pennsylvania. So it's one of the few places that you can go and see trees just like in the previous slide. It's really an impressive park if you ever get a chance to visit it. So in the 1920s, they had some money. They were purchasing these parks. But in 1929, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. So unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of money put into parks after that point. So back to Gifford Pinchot. In April 10th of 1933, Franklin Roosevelt created the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. Now, where Gifford Pinchot comes into play is he actually modeled the CCC off of Gifford Pinchot's original workforce in PA State Parks. So FDR was actually the governor of New York at the time when Pinchot was creating these workforces. And when he came into office as the president, he decided that he wanted to scale these to a national level. So he actually worked directly with Pinchot to create the CCC. And the CCC provided jobs for young men ages 18 to 26, and they paid them $30 a month, which back then was a lot of money. Many of these boys actually didn't need this money for themselves because they were paid, or they were fed and clothed, and they were provided housing as well. So they would send this money back to their families to help get them through the Depression. These jobs included everything from planting trees and shrubs and landscaping to creating and clearing roads, building buildings, pavilions, picnic areas. They also did firefighting and wildlife habitats. So these kids not only helped to create many of the parks that we see today, but they also learned a lot of valuable skills that would be useful to them after the dismantlement of the CCC in 1942. So unfortunately, wars create economic booms, and that's just the case of what happened after World War II. So things changed. We had a better roadway system. Actually, the interstate road system was created. And people began to travel more, and they began to travel further away. So the current Secretary of the Department of Forests and Waters, which is what the DCNR was called back then, his name was Maurice Goddard. He created a goal that he wanted to see a park within 25 miles of every citizen in Pennsylvania. He didn't quite reach that goal. There's still a few areas that that's not quite the case. But he actually added 45 new parks within his tenure, including Little Buffalo State Park. In 1972, the Pennsylvania Department of Forests and Waters got renamed to the DNR, or the Department of Natural Resources, and then that later gets split off into the DEP and the DCNR. And then throughout the 1970s through the 1990s, we had several different parks added, and we had 2 large tracts of land donated to us by a gentleman named Joseph E. Iberson. So these areas were designated as conservation areas, meaning that we were not allowed to develop them. They were mainly just for passive recreation, meaning hunting and hiking. So no trails could be made on them for four-wheelers or for horses, and no facilities other than pavilions would be allowed to be added there. So actually, I mentioned Joseph Iberson because Iberson State Park, or Iberson Conservation Area as it's called, is actually one of the parks that Little Buffalo helps to manage. In 2015, then, we actually had our latest state park added, and that was Washington Crossing, making it the 121st state park. So DCNR positions, there's actually a wide variety of different jobs available within the DCNR. The ones that I'm going to talk a little bit more about are the administrative, the law enforcement, safety, and education, and then the trades and maintenance positions. So I have those highlighted, but that's by no means the only positions. There's also positions in computer science, so we need IT professionals. We need engineering and environmental professionals, so people that are good at architectural design and mapping, drafting, and things like that. And then we have a variety of non-civil service positions as well. So ones that you don't have to go through the civil service testing in order to do. So general laborers, custodians, and food service workers are also employed by the DCNR. So we actually have an internship program, which might be interesting to some students. You actually have to be enrolled in college to start this, but this is something to keep in mind when you do decide to go to college. Anybody pursuing any degree in architecture, engineering, science of any kind, or even technical degrees can all be allowed to pursue one of these internships. There's not a lot of them available, and you have to check often because they're not usually posted for very long. But this is something that you could do, especially in the summertime. We hire several interns for various jobs in the parks. Sometimes we can even get interns to help with educational programs and things like that, which is what I do. So these resources will be made available to participants. We'll send out an email if you would like with some of these, or at least some more information on these internships. So the first job or group of jobs that I like to talk about is the administrative positions. So if you're not an outdoors person, there's still jobs for you within the DCNR. Every state park has an administrative assistant, which is someone who has gone through a 4-year degree of some sort, or has a combination of prior office-related experience. The administrative assistant, or AA, is in charge of basically everything office-related. So they do payrolls, they do budgeting, they help out with employees when they have forms and certificates to get, and they answer the phones, they do secretarial work, they do permitting, so just about a little bit of everything. The step underneath that would be a clerk typist. They're generally a seasonal worker that is just hired to assist with the AA and to assist with answering phones, selling permits, and helping visitors that come into the park office. There's another title that's a little bit confusing, and that's called the clerk. And the difference between the clerk and the clerk typist is the clerk typist is usually within the office itself and is helping the AA. And the clerk's jobs will vary depending on the state park. For example, here at Little Buffalo, our clerks are actually working in the ticket booth. So their jobs are from 11 to 7. They work the same hours as the pool is open, and they're basically taking money and working with visitors at the pool setting. Some parks might have clerks for education buildings or other areas of the park. So they could be doing a variety of different jobs. So that's something that if you're interested in that position, you would have to contact the park that you would be looking at the offer for and just seeing exactly what that job consists of, because it does change within the Bureau. Another interesting job that a lot of people don't know about is the park manager and trainee. So park managers aren't just hired, they do have to go through the trainee program. A trainee starts out at $46,000 a year, so it's a very, very substantial paycheck for a trainee. But they have to do a lot of different things. They have to learn basically everything in the park. So budgeting, payroll, they oversee many of the projects in the park. They have to supervise all of the employees. And they have to coordinate with upper management as well as dealing with the public, which sometimes can be very difficult. The managers also generally live within the park, so they are provided with a housing. But this is difficult for some people because you don't get to choose where you live or where you work. The park managers are sent where they need them. Bachelor's degree in environmental science is needed with at least a year experience in managing a park. So if you have that trainee program, you can get that experience, but you do have to have that bachelor's degree. And there's also PA residency requirements and driver's license requirements for several of these jobs. Now, the position that I started out with was the DCNR Ranger trainee. So that was just a written exam through the civil service test. And obviously, I was 21 years of 21 years of age at the time. I had my driver's license. I was a PA resident. And you have to be physically capable, which means you have to go through a series of physical fitness tests. So this includes push-ups, sit-ups, bench pressing, and running. So you do have to be physically able in order to do this position. You have to also have at least 15 credits in some sort of environmental science. You don't have to have your full degree, but they do require those environmental science credits. They want our law enforcement rangers to be very familiar with outdoor recreation and the wildlife in the parks. You also have to have your CPR and first aid certifications. And the Act 120 physical requirements is what I was talking about. So if you're interested in this kind of position, we can send you details on that. But basically, that's a vision test, the running test, lifting weights, and things like that. The law enforcement rangers are exactly like the state police of a state park. So their jurisdiction is only within the state park that they're operating in, but they have the full powers of state police. So they're able to enforce game regulations, fishing and boating regulations, park safety rules, as well as vehicle and drug violations as well. So depending on the parks that you get into, some of our rangers see a lot of these kinds of violations within our state parks, and they're expected to deal with those. They're also respond to any emergencies in the park. So anytime 911 has to be called, the rangers are usually the first to be there. We also have a position that's called a Park Ranger 1, and this is more of what a lot of people think of as your typical park ranger. They do a lot of what the DCNR Ranger does, but they don't have the powers of arrest. So they can talk with visitors and they can enforce rules and regulations to a point, but they can't really do anything other than telling people what the rules are. So if they would need to call a park ranger or a DCNR ranger for someone who's not listening to the rules and regulations, they do have to do that. But park rangers do a little bit more of maybe like basic maintenance in the park, helping to hand out maps, talking with visitors. Our park ranger here at Little Buffalo patrols the pool a lot, so he works over there very closely with the lifeguards. And so he's basically just all around the park doing a little bit of everything. They don't require any college degree, which is a little bit nicer. Their pay is not quite as much, but they also have to have 2 years of working with the public. So you do have to have some prior public experience before a job like this. And just like many of our positions here, you also need first aid and CPR certifications to be hired. So you're going to see that in a couple different positions. And they're not hard to get. A position that we're looking for, especially high school and college age kids, is the lifeguard position. One of the reasons that we weren't able to open the pool 7 days a week this year is because of a lack of lifeguards. So it's not difficult to get your certification, but you do have to obtain a lifeguarding certificate. So that means to go through a training course of some sort. YMCA has them, Red Cross has them. And then you also have to get your first aid and CPR certifications for both adult, child, and infant. There are separate certifications for those. You don't have to have them for the time of the civil service application, but you must have those in hand for your interview. So if you go through the civil service, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and you take the test, you pass it, and you get offered an interview, you would want to go and get those certifications right away. The lifeguards will rotate between the pool and the first aid station. So they rotate about 15 minutes at a time. They're on the chair. So it's definitely not a difficult position. If you like being outside and you like being poolside or by the water, it's definitely an interesting position to get into. And these are all different parks within our park system that hire lifeguards. Now, my job is called the Environmental Education Specialist, or EES. It's basically just a fancy word for the park naturalist. So my job is basically to provide educational programming, such as this one right here, to schools and day camps and the general public. So I am a year-round employee. Some of these EESs are only seasonal, but a year-round EES will be doing school programs during the winter time, as well as winter festivals. Like we have in the fall, we have our Apple Festival and things like that, so I coordinate that. And in the winter time, we have our Christmas trail, and we have maple sugaring festivals or activities. So I do a little bit of all of that. I also manage volunteers in the park, so anyone from campground hosts to scout groups and things like that. Anybody who wants to volunteer here at Little Buffalo or our conservation areas has to go through me. The only downside to this job, even though it's a lot of fun, is you do work holidays and weekends, especially in the summertime. So that's when we want to provide the most activities for our guests. So unfortunately, we have to be here July 4th weekend, Memorial Day weekend, Labor Day weekend, and all that. So if you're the type of person that doesn't mind that, this could be a really, really good job for you. You do have to have a 4-year degree in some sort of environmental science. So mine was in wildlife and fisheries science. You could be in parks and recreation, biology. There's a lot of different degrees that will qualify you for this position. We also do, we lead recreational activities within the park, so hiking activities. I take people kayaking when COVID isn't a problem. We do fishing and other things like that as well. So it is a very fun and rewarding job. There is a step below this job. It's the environmental interpretive technician. So this is basically a seasonal educator. Actually, they're always seasonal. They're usually only hired for a period in the summertime, although some parks might hire them for the winter months, depending on how busy they are. They make a little bit less money, but they don't require the same level of college education. So only 6 credits in an environmental field, or if you've worked 3 months in another environmental field. So maybe you worked for 3 months at Wildwood Park or another park or something like that. So that could actually count towards your credits for a position like this. This would be an excellent introductory job for someone that's interested in education, especially outdoor education. We also hire a variety of maintenance positions as well. Most of our seasonal positions are what we call the semi-skilled laborers. And most organizations within the state will hire semi-skilled laborers. It just depends on what organization and what they do. So in DCNR state parks, our laborers are mainly just maintaining the parks, doing everything from mowing and trimming grass and trails, to basic construction projects that might need done, cleaning up campsites, cleaning out cabins, picking up trash every day, a little bit of everything within the park. So if you like getting your hands dirty or you like outdoor work, this is a really good entry level position as well with DCNR. As you go up in training, or there's a lot of other positions in maintenance that are a little bit more specific that need additional training. So different types of mechanics exist. We have wastewater treatment plant operators, and there's a whole bunch of other titles that exist within the maintenance department. But those all require a little bit more training and a little bit more education. And when you see those in the civil service site, you can look at the description and see what all is needed for each position. Now, I like to just mention our sister agencies like the Fish and Boat Commission as well as the Game Commission. These agencies hire very similar job titles. So within education, they have Aquatic Resource Program Specialists. They also have EESs and EITs that do a variety of programming with them. They hire far fewer of those, though. So usually there's only one per region, and I believe there's 4 regions within the state. So you're not going to see near as many of those positions. They also hire maintenance people. So their maintenance workers may work in the fish hatcheries, or they may work out of regional offices. They go around and mow and maintain the fishing boat accesses. So they do have a small maintenance crew that does that. You could also enter a biology field within the Fish and Boat Commission. So if you were like me, I was originally a little bit more interested in the biology aspect of it. They actually hire fisheries biologists and technicians that go out into the streams and monitor fish populations and stream quality and things like that. They also have law enforcement, just like the DCNR Rangers. They are called WCOs, or Waterways Conservation Officers. In order to get into that program, you have to have a diploma or GED, a driver's license. You have to meet those same Act 120 requirements as a DCNR Ranger, so those physical fitness requirements. And then you go through an additional 20 weeks of police training plus 32 weeks of boating and fishery training. So it's a very long course, it's almost a year long. You could also be a volunteer deputy WCO if you think that maybe this is something that you might be interested in the future, but you don't want to quite dedicate that 52 weeks of training just yet. You can volunteer with them and see if that's the right job for you. And just like every other organization, there's also clerical staff as well. The Game Commission is the same way, so they have educators as well, just not as many of them. Their maintenance crew maintains the state game lands and shooting ranges and things like that. They also have equipment operators as well to work within the state game lands. They have a biology department too, but it's very, very small. And they as well have law enforcement. Their WCOs are called Wildlife Conservation Officers. They have to require a little bit of college for theirs. So either 2 years of college, or you could get away with active duty military service, or hours as a deputy or a volunteer WCO. You have to have a driver's license, be 21 years of age. They also want you to have a hunting license for at least 2 years. It doesn't really make sense to have a WCO enforcing hunting laws that has never had a hunting license. They go through 20 weeks of police training just like the DCNR Rangers and the Fish and Boat, but they also go through an additional 30 weeks of wildlife-related coursework, which from what I hear is a lot of fun. It's everything from dealing with wildlife nuisance calls, capturing animals, and things like that. They too have volunteer deputy WCOs, and you could also become a hunter and instructor as well. Clerical staff as well. And so that's basically the couple organizations that I'm familiar with. So now I want to talk just a little bit briefly about the Civil Service Commission. And so if anybody has any questions at any point during this brief talk, I'm going to pull up the Civil Service Commission and kind of walk you through it a little bit. But the Civil Service Commission was created so that employees were hired based on merit and qualification, meaning how good they were for the job. And so it wasn't just about who you knew. to be able to get into the state. So what you would do is you would pull up, I actually just type in pa.gov jobs, or you can type in employment.pa.gov, and you're going to see this big blue tab that says open jobs, view jobs, and apply. So you have three sections here. You have open to the public, which is what you would look at. Internal postings would be for employees that are already employed by the Commonwealth. So if you wanted to switch from DCNR to another organization, you would look there. But there's also the Internships tab, which I'll click on very briefly. There's not much going on right now for internships, most likely because of the coronavirus situation. But if you check that tab, probably in the spring, you might see more in there. But what we're going to do is we're going to click on the Open to Public, and you're going to see a whole list of different positions. And this is all of the agencies within the state use this civil service site to hire. So you're going to see Game Commission for a couple of these, Department of Human Services, local government, municipal retirement system. If you want to look for just DCNR or just Game Commission, we have this nice filter button over here. So we can filter by the department. So if I want to look for jobs within the DCNR, and we'll say the DEP as well, I'm going to check those two, and I'm going to look down through and see what kinds of jobs are available. So we have a Clerk 1 posting. We have custodial workers, DCNR rangers, and ranger trainees. So when you're looking across the job posting, you're going to see the job type. This is civil service, which means you have to take some sort of test or go through an application process. Location. So some of these postings are for multiple job offers statewide. So if it's up all the time and there's multiple job offers, they're always hiring, you're going to see that location of statewide. If it's for a single job offer, you're going to see a county, so Somerset County or Cumberland County. And often in parentheses, they'll put the particular park that they're looking for. The department, so that would be obviously DCNR. I'm not seeing, oh, here's a DEP one. So you'll see different departments as well based on what you've selected. And then pay attention to the posting and especially the closing date. Many of these jobs are only on here for a few weeks, sometimes only about a week. So you have to sometimes check this very often and make sure you apply within that closing date. The salaries are also listed here. If they're salaries or hourly, as opposed to if they're a salaried position, you'll see that as, say, $39,000 a year, as opposed to a wage employee, which would be shown up as hourly. So there's a little bit difference there between a seasonal position and a full-time position. And then the category is basically how you can filter out different job categories. So the category lists this under parks, natural resource, and also office and administrative support, because this is a Clerk 1 position. So if I wanted to get rid of the department and I wanted to look based on job category, maybe I was only interested in office type of jobs, so I would go down through and I would find that particular job category, and then I would see all of these office and administrative support type of jobs. One of the things that I particularly was interested in was working with animals. So I chose, thinking there was an agricultural, but I chose environmental services, and I believe there's a wildlife option here as well. So you could look through and see what kinds of animal-related jobs were out there. So we have some stuff from Game Commission, statewide positions, as well as certain county-only positions as well. Does anybody have any questions on that? The filter option is very nice because you can also filter just by county. So if I wanted to look at just jobs in Perry and Juniata County, unfortunately there's not much going on right now, but we have a job at Louisville Youth Detention Center, and we have roadway coordinators for Juniata County PennDOT. So you can look just by county as well. Anyone have any questions about any of that?
Mindy, I do have a question. So for the civil service test, how are folks where do they take that test at? Because I heard that some are online now, or do they actually go to a location like Strawberry Square in Harrisburg?
So they've changed a lot of these positions. They've gotten away from the physical testing site for most positions. And that's very recent, like that's within the past year. It depends on the position. You basically have to click on the position and go down through and figure out how to apply. So it will give you a description on how to apply. So this position that I clicked on, this limited term Pennsylvania Game Commission dispatcher, you would go down through the description to figure out if this was something that you were interested in or not. One thing I tell people is to be careful with the benefits tab, because a lot of times, especially with seasonal positions, they'll have this description in the benefits tab, but it's just something that's in everyone. And so you have to look through the description and make sure that it doesn't say somewhere that there are no benefits with this position, because certain ones are tricky like that. But for the most part, you can somewhat count on that. It says, you get a full health benefits package with this position. And then you have these supplemental questions that go with it. So for many of these positions, it's down to just these supplemental questions that you will ask. And what you have to do is you actually have to sign up with the Civil Service Commission. So you have to make an account. And when you're ready to apply, then you would just hit the apply button. You would sign in, and then you would be able to answer or ask, or I should say answer whatever questions that come up. So I think I can get in here and just pretend to apply. But so this is what it would look like then when you actually get in to the application process. So it's going to ask you for your contact information, previous work experience, your education, and then any additional certificates, licenses that you might have, since, say, the lifeguarding position would require it. You might get a little bit of brownie points for already having those certificates in hand. Additional languages can provide you with extra points, other skills such as typing speed and things like that. And then it'll often ask for some sort of references too. There's another place then that you can attach any kind of supplemental documents. So maybe they need a copy of child clearances or things like that. And then these are the questions that it'll ask you that are specific for this position, making sure you're 18 or older, your municipality, and things like that. So then that's basically all you would have to do for this particular position. I don't know if any of them right now are testing like in Strawberry Square. I think they're all online as far as I know right now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And another one was, can you retake the civil service test? So if you do it once, maybe you didn't score very well, can you go back in and retest?
Yes, unless it specifies otherwise. So there are some positions, and it will specify within the job description if you can only test for it once. They've made this kind of confusing, but they have been changing it here for the past maybe 2 years. So a lot of these things are currently being updated. So that's something where you would definitely want to click on the description and see if it says if you can retest or not. Most of them you can. The tests are usually free and you can take them as many times as you want. But they could be changing that or in the process of changing that. So that could be something that you would run into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm just kind of cruising down through to see if there's any particular positions that I can think of that would be like that. So, for example, the Fish and Boat Waterway Conservation Trainee Program, it says you must apply to this posting, meet eligibility requirements, complete the supplemental questions, and receive a score. Your score is only valid for this vacancy. So if there's a particular vacancy and it specifies that, that means that if you wanted other jobs in other parks or other areas, you would have to go and take the test or the answer the questions for each vacancy. So they have changed it. It used to be you could just go to the Strawberry Square, you'd take the civil service test for, say, environmental education specialist, and then all of the parks would send you their job postings. But they're kind of getting away from that. They're changing things a little bit. So just read through the description. If you have any questions, you can contact us or you can contact the Civil Service Department, and we can try to give you a little bit better idea of how to do these. Anything else? So this was just a couple things that I added to watch out for. Remember I said about the benefits tab. Make sure that you read it closely because some places will say, up here I put a little clip it says that this position has no benefits. However, under the benefits tab, it has that generic description of Pennsylvania state employee benefits. So you do want to just keep that in mind if it specifies that there isn't any benefits to it. You want to keep that in mind before you apply. Like I said, there's also the difference between they're changing a lot to an online test or an online application as opposed to going to a testing center. So they're kind of getting away from that. You always want to make sure you upload everything that they ask for, resumes, any certificates that you have, all of that kind of stuff is uploaded within the site. Read the entire posting a couple times and then contact them with any questions that you might have. They're very accommodating. They understand that some of their stuff is still a little confusing and people are still kind of, learning it. So if you do call them with questions, they're usually more than happy to work with you. All right. So test your knowledge. I want to see if anybody's paying attention. Who knows what group of mainly young men helped to develop the state parks in 1933? Does anyone want to try and answer a question? See how many people are actually paying attention. I also have.
See if I get any chats in. I'll see if I get any chats in for the answers.
Yep, that's what I'm watching too. We'll see if anybody gets any of these. But if anybody has any additional questions, I'm going to hang out here for a few extra minutes, and that's all I have for you guys today. So I appreciate you calling in, and you can always contact the park office if you're looking at specific job postings with us, and ask any questions that you might have. All right, so nobody has any questions?
Yeah, I don't see anything with the testing your knowledge question.
All right, so if that's it, then we'll just hang out on the line for a little bit, and I appreciate you guys all tuning in for this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mindy. And if anybody has any questions, if you have yet to submit, go ahead and use the chat feature to submit to one of us. And I'll just kind of keep an eye out, look to see if anything more comes in. I did have something down for myself just to ask, when I think about this presentation, and I think you mentioned it, so maybe for the lifeguards, thing like that, how often do you get to work at the closest state park to you? I mean, do you have to usually venture out pretty far to go to different areas, or?
Can you repeat that?
How often do you get to work at the closest state park to you?
Oh, so you mean if you're just starting out and you want a job with the state parks, like, are you saying what's your chance of getting something close by?
Yeah, yep.
So it depends. I mean, it's going to depend on what position you're looking at. what the park needs and how many parks are close to you. There's no state parks in Juniata County. And then if you go to Mifflin County, I believe Greenwood's still in Mifflin County. I have to think about that. But Perry County, we have Colonel Denning and Little Buffalo. So Colonel Denning keeps going through educators. Nobody stays there for very long, so they're constantly hiring a new educator for Colonel Denning. Maintenance staff is sometimes the seasonal employees will find full-time jobs in another park or another department. So they're often moving through. We kind of have like an entry-level position for them, and then they usually move on. So we have every year we have a couple maintenance positions open up, seasonal maintenance positions. And ticket booth clerks are another thing that we usually have. We usually have college kids just for a few years or a year or two, and then they move on. But we're always hiring lifeguards. So because they're mostly high school and college age, we always have room to hire several of those. What schools are good for park rangers and those types of jobs? So if you're interested in becoming a park ranger, you have to decide if you want to go into more of the law enforcement aspect of it, or maybe you just want to do kind of what I do or what the Park Ranger 1 does. You just want to work in the parks and be outside, greeting people and things like that. If you are kind of more on the environmental side and you just want to be in the parks and working in the parks, literally any college with environmental related fields is sufficient. So you could go to HAC and get credits in biology or environmental science and things like that. I definitely would not be looking at the most expensive college for either career choice. If you're going into law enforcement or you like the idea of being a law enforcement ranger, you might want to focus your college career a little bit more on the law enforcement aspect of it, but definitely make sure that you're taking those environmental science credits because they are necessary for the application process. Does that make sense? Okay, any others?
All right, it looks like we might have, oh, they said yes, thank you.
Awesome.
All right, I don't see any more questions. So I just want to thank you all for joining again today. And Mindy, I really appreciate your time and reviewing all this with us. If anybody has any questions or comments, feedback for us, or if you would like more information about our services available to you, don't hesitate to reach out. I just copied and pasted our contact information for program staff in your county. It should be in the chat box. Just going to look one more time just to make sure there's no more questions on here, and I don't see anything else. So I think we'll just go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you very much and take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. And if you have any more of these that you'd like me to help you with, just let me know, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.